Thanks, Marissa, for the warm welcome. Imagine you're a full cycle recruiter with a load of 15 active requisitions. You receive a request from a hiring manager on the executive leadership team. She tells you she needs a diverse slate of prospects reflective of the total addressable market within the next 48 hours. Where do you start? Whose support do you enlist? Do you panic? Ask for more time? Or head to your recruiting toolbox to retrieve a surefire strategy? Today, I'll share a few ideas that will help you start thinking more critically about your current approach to sourcing diverse talent. Welcome to Diversity in 3D, getting intentional about inclusive sourcing. Good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone. My name is Maisha Cannon. I've been working in human resources and recruiting since the 1900s. 1994 BG to be exact. That's before Google, if you can even imagine such a time. Now, over the years, I've worked as a recruiting coordinator, a full cycle recruiter, and a dedicated sourcer. And in my current role, I help recruiters and sourcers work smarter by infusing practical creativity into their daily workflows. Now, in the next 25 minutes, my goal is to share information, engage you in conversation, and spark a transformation in the way you think about sourcing inclusively. To keep it interactive, I'll be keeping my eyes on the chat. So please pop in at any time with questions or insights. Now, at the end of today's session, I have a gift for you to say thank you for your time and engagement. It's a 3D swag bag, a digital download that will contain the slides from today's session and over 25 resources that I've curated around this topic. So here's our agenda for this action-packed, speedy session. First, we'll start with defining diversity for your team. Then we'll consider how sourcers and recruiters can dive into data as they build and refine their inclusive sourcing strategies. Finally, we'll consider some of the ways sourcers and recruiters can diversify their approaches to attracting a wide spectrum of qualified people. Are you ready? Let's get intentional about inclusive sourcing. Shout out to Sarah Goldberg, the 2020 SourceCon Hackathon champion, who inspired the title of today's session. Thank you, Sarah. A quick Google search for the exact phrase, "What is diversity?" yields 1.1 million results. It's no wonder then that diversity can take on so many different meanings in our daily discussions. For the purposes of our conversation, I'll be working from this definition from the HR Director website. So beyond describing an inclusive workplace, what exactly does it mean to source inclusively on your open positions? Well, it depends. The first question I'd ask is, how does your organization define diversity? And how do your hiring teams define diversity? Are these definitions aligned? You can take it a step further and consider the ways in which your industry defines diversity and how that changes when you go from local to global operations. While TA teams most certainly have a part to play in the journey towards more inclusive workplaces, this is not something you alone can define as a recruiter or sourcer. Conversations with key partners will be critical as you begin to define diversity in your company. Without these conversations, you may be working from assumptions or a limited view of the market you're supporting. When I worked as a full cycle recruiter for Sodexo, shortly before the Great Recession of 2008, I supported the regional hiring of clinical and registered dietitians for schools and hospitals. Sodexo did something that I've not seen any other talent acquisition team do. They incentivized recruiters each quarter on meeting several metrics. One of those metrics was presenting a diverse slate of candidates. From what I can recall, that particular metric was assessed by the 5 candidates we presented for on-site interviews. And at that time, for my registered dietitian roles in the Western region of United States, the underrepresented minority was men. Now, I looked up the demographics of clinical dietitians now, since I don't recall what they were over a decade ago. And as you can see, as of October 2020, 94% of registered dietitians are women. This is an example to get us thinking outside of our assumptions and truly start defining diversity based on the position, location, markets, and industry. It's time for our first 60-second share. And I invite you to participate because our collective knowledge and experience is far greater than my own. And I'd like to leverage that during our time together. What questions are top of mind for you when you think about diversity in your workplace? Go ahead and share your questions in the chat. And though I'm pretty certain that I will not have answers to these questions, I will respond. And I think it's a great exercise for us so that we're prepared to ask our internal partners these questions when the time is right. Good questions coming in the chat. Got another 20 seconds or so if you haven't hopped in. Nice. Thank you to those of you who participated in our first 60-second share. And if you weren't able to hop in, maybe your coffee hasn't kicked in yet, it's okay. There will be another opportunity coming up shortly. So we've explored how we can start a conversation to define diversity within our organizations. Now let's dive into data with an emphasis on collaboration. Leaders across many companies and tech are setting targets to increase their top of funnel diversity. One major tech company has gone from a workforce that's 3% Black to 3.8% Black in the past 6 years. Progress is possible, but rarely is the path a simple one. In my experience, getting from point A to B is more similar to the latter illustration. It's often this nonlinear path that requires creativity, curiosity, and consistency. Going from current to future state will also require the willingness to experiment, evaluate, hit the reset button, and start again. Collaboration is essential as you make discoveries and connect the dots along this journey. Connecting the dots between points A and B is easier to do with real-time data. Let's take, for example, this top of funnel activity from a hardworking technical sourcer I know. Now, after reviewing her Q2 2019 data in GEM, she was able to make slight adjustments to impact the number of qualified women who received initial outreach. She went from contacting 14% women to 46% women over 2 quarters. And the main iteration came with just an awareness of where her numbers were. Having this data at your fingertips means you know exactly where you're trending quarterly, monthly, or even weekly. Now, I've highlighted this data because it's important from a sourcer's perspective. But what about our hiring partners? Enter valued variables. Valued variables represent the data that is most important to our hiring managers. Knowing what's most important to our hiring partners ensures that we're measuring what matters and sharing the data that is most impactful. And this is the simple question I ask when trying to determine those valued variables. What is most important to you, Mr. or Mrs. Hiring Manager? And it's important to ask this question in our kickoff meetings or as soon as possible during the recruitment. I have one hiring manager now who is most interested in time and stage. I built a quick report in Jim to share with him during our weekly Zoom check ins. His hiring team is doing a phenomenal job of moving people through the process swiftly, getting their feedback into the applicant tracking system, and staying in touch with the recruiter. Now, I want to give you an opportunity to analyze a hypothetical pipeline for an open position. So take a moment to review this data, and you'll see candidate ethnicities on the left and the hiring stages across the top. What stands out to you? Hop into chat and let me know what questions or observations you have about this data. There are no right or wrong answers, and it would be great for you to look at this from your unique lens, whether you're a recruiter, a talent acquisition leader, or an operations partner. Keeping an eye on the chat and on our time. Another 20 seconds or so. Anything that stands out to you? Yes, many thanks to those of you who are sharing your questions and your insights in the chat. Down to about 5 seconds here. Now, what stood out to me was the drop off in Hispanic and Latino candidates after the hiring manager interview. As a practitioner, this is where I would pause, engage with my hiring and recruiting partners, and dig a little deeper. So we've covered defining diversity and diving into data. For this final dimension, let's analyze a few strategies that we can employ to diversify the active prospect pool. Now, admittedly, this is one of my favorite parts because I get to be creative. So props to the dad who is working from home while parenting during a pandemic. And as you look at these existing resources, your list may be longer depending on what's available in your recruiting stack. Just a heads up that we're going to move pretty swiftly through these next few sections, but keep in mind that you will have access to the slides and the swag bag resources shortly. So the question to ask yourself as you evaluate each of these existing resources is, am I maximizing this resource? For example, are you using full text search in your ATS to identify members of specific organizations? Here in Greenhouse, I found over 200 warm leads who have already applied that happen to be members of NSBE. What could be a potential next step for a recruiter or sourcer to take? Go ahead and hop into chat if you have ideas on how you might use this information. In LinkedIn Recruiter, are you maximizing your use of advanced search filters? Here's one for military veterans. And how often do you iterate on your LinkedIn sourcing strategy? You typically start by searching for title or keyword or school. Next time you're in LinkedIn, start from scratch and select groups to source within. This minor adjustment will surface new, potentially more inclusive search results. If you're using Talent Insights, do you have a scalable system by which you can provide this pertinent market data to each recruiter in time for their kickoff with the hiring team? We've found this strategy to be helpful in both managing hiring partner expectations and setting both the recruiter and sourcer up for success. Finally, are you optimizing Jim? Here I've searched by project to quickly retrieve 100 leads from a Women Hack LA event we attended. And I can now send custom nurture sequences to this group. And the names have been hidden in this example. As you think about nurturing existing talent or attracting new leads to your organization, outreach is a big part of it. When I'm customizing outreach, no matter the intended recipient, I am aiming to add value. The idea behind the acronym ADD is rooted in my early days of sourcing, right around the time when Reid Hoffman, who we heard from this morning, launched LinkedIn. As a regional recruiter for Hot Topic back then, I was traveling 3 weeks a month, visiting malls across America. I would walk into the stores of our competitors and attempt to recruit managers right out of the store. In the same way that I had to immediately establish rapport with prospects in person, I try now with every message I send to bring that same authenticity, desire to delight, and flair for being different. You'll find an article in your swag bag that walks you through how you can refresh your existing outreach to add value. Now, once you've optimized all the resources in your existing toolkit, how can you expand your scope to attract talent from a variety of backgrounds and experiences? Shout out to Kim Jones. I recently attended a webinar hosted by Kim and Torrin Ellis, both experts in diversity recruitment practices. At the end of this rich and in depth webinar, Kim shared this massive list. She called it an end to end diversity, equity, and inclusion resource list. What a gift! It served as the perfect reminder that we should be tracking all of the research and efforts that we're doing collectively as a team to build an ongoing I&D library of resources. Now, you're likely familiar with the popular organizations and associations that your target candidates are a part of. The more you know about these groups, the better chance you will have to incorporate this knowledge into your basic or advanced searches in both structured databases or on the web. I'll quickly share 3 examples of how you can start to optimize organization and association information when you find a resource like the DEI end-to-end list that Kim shared on her webinar. You can start by using a new search engine. There's a resource in your swag bag from the godfather or founding father of sourcing, Shally Steckel, that highlights 5 search engines that are not named Google. Here are 4 Boolean strings that I built using one of the organizations, Society of Women Engineers, a string of Black Greek fraternities, and a nonprofit called DevColor, started by a Black software engineer in Silicon Valley. Now, if you're familiar with advanced search operators, you'll recognize that file type command. I was looking for resumes, so doc or PDF work well. The site X-ray that I used on About Me and Quora allows me to quickly examine all the pages within a given website for a specific term. And that related colon command helps me find similar sites. So here, I wanted to find more sites like Fairy Godboss, which is a women's career community similar to Glassdoor. And in case you were wondering, yes, these strings will produce varying results depending on the search engine you use. The last tip on organization and associations is to explore each organization in depth. Now, this is great to do as a team activity. Working from your master list, you can start to understand the entirety of the organization's digital and offline footprint. Did you know that SHIP had a Reddit page? This was about 10 minutes worth of research for me to find these. So imagine how much more you can find in partnership with your team. Now, here are a few ideas to consider as you expand your scope and partner with peers. And I have to give you props for partnering with peers this morning across industries here at the GEM User Summit today. Kudos to you. Now, identifying cultural ambassadors or culture champions will be easy if your organization fosters an environment that supports your employees' growth and development, both as professionals and as people. If your coworkers who are from underrepresented and marginalized groups are treated with dignity and fairness, those people will become champions of your brand and talk about it as often as they can, sometimes in places you may not have access to. Now, in addition to all the varied online spaces where you can find underrepresented groups discussing their views and opinions, there are also some off the grid type groups. For example, I'm in a group with almost 7,000 members on a certain social site. Though it's not a place where a recruiter could freely post your job opening, for example, there are daily comments, posts, and quite engaging threads from people who love their companies and hate their companies. It's quite similar to a recruiter's backdoor reference check. Just a little food for thought. So, here are a few ideas on the last topic under expanding your scope. Are you actively using social media to source talent from a variety of backgrounds? If so, drop the name of your go to social channel in the chat. The last shout out for today goes to Katrina Kibben for inspiration that came in the form of a tweet in 2018. This tweet inspired me to start tracking event titles as I noticed them on social media, specifically Twitter. I now have a list of 50 or 60 hashtags of events or movements from people representing a variety of backgrounds. I've collected them in Evernote for myself, and now for the first time publicly, I'm sharing some of them here to illustrate the many approaches you can take to discover people on social media. See anything new here? Hop into chat and let me know if you see any hashtags that could be worth a closer look. Now, a bonus tip while we're on the topic of Twitter. If you use the advanced search option, Twitter will turn your multiple hashtags into an OR string for you. And you can then copy and paste that Boolean string and use it on other social sites where hashtags are used. Years ago, when I worked for Google as a contract sourcer, I set up a Google alert similar to the one that you see here. This alert retrieved an article that highlighted Cassidy as the first female Latina winner of a hackathon during her senior year in college. Though Cassidy was already in our ATS, CRM, and LinkedIn, she had not previously responded to our team's messages. Before I could think of a message that would add value, I went to Twitter and clicked the follow button. To my surprise, she immediately followed back and DM'd me. We connected, and I invited her to visit the Google campus. Though she did not accept our offer, it was, after all, one of 10 offers she received the year she graduated. We remained in touch. And for this last 60-second share, I would love to know, where have you sourced outside of LinkedIn? And maybe even outside of your applicant tracking system and CRM. Hop in the chat and share at least one of those ideas. And you can include both offline and online sourcing efforts. If you've been recruiting since the 1900s like me, you may remember the days when we sourced at the grocery store in line. That counts too. Sourcing strategies never expire, so feel free to drop that in the chat. Awesome. Another 20 seconds to share. All right. Thank you to all of those who have shared places that you've sourced for talent outside of the standard. And if you were drawn to blank and you couldn't think of anything, don't worry. I've added an article that I wrote in your swag bag that lists about 15 places that I regularly source outside of LinkedIn. So maybe that'll help with future ideas. So it's time to review what we've covered today. We talked about the importance of defining diversity for your industry, region, and company. Then we examined diving into data and measuring what matters to our hiring managers. Lastly, we shared ideas on diversifying our approach to sourcing inclusive talent pools. So as we revisit our opening scenario, where would you start? You receive this request for a diverse slate of senior candidates within the week. Would you start with one of the 3Ds? Somewhere else? Feel free to drop your ideas in the chat. Now, here is my challenge for you. Choose one dimension to explore in more detail next week. Perhaps you've already defined diversity internally, but you're looking to spend more time now researching industry benchmarks. Or maybe you've already optimized all your existing resources, but it's time to become more intentional about how you use social media as a team for sourcing. If you're willing to accept this challenge, hop into chat and type, "I'm in," or you can type in a +1, that works too. Wonderful. So here's your gift for being present today. It's a 3D swag bag. I encourage you to take a screenshot of this slide or simply jot down the link. And at this bit.ly, you'll find a digital PDF with the slides from today's session and links to over 25 resources that will support you as you delve into these 3 dimensions of diversity. The swag bag will be available for the next 30 days. So download, share, and enjoy. It's been wonderful spending the past half hour with you. I want to wish you the best as you strive to get more intentional about inclusive sourcing strategies. Feel free to get connected on social, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks to the GYM team for a space to share. Enjoy the rest of the User Summit.